Hi there, my name is Ravit Rose, founder of the iRuse community app. Very excited to be here with Jenny Ward, who is a high conflict divorce coach. Our topic of conversation today is listening to kids' voices in high conflict. And I think this is a really important topic because as a divorce coach, I have worked with many parents in many different situations, whether they live in the US, whether they live in Canada, it doesn't matter. It's all high conflict is all the same. And sometimes it's really important to listen to the kids' voices and not just use your emotions and your thoughts as a parent in determining, what should be the next steps, what's the best next move to make. Because often enough, our emotions as human beings misguide us and mislead us. So it's important to speak to a specialist if you're dealing with a high conflict divorce, if you have one out of the two parents, which is, difficult, which is unstable, which is, whatever word you want to use, making the situation more difficult for the children. What do you do? What do you not do? So Jenny's going to provide some direction, and then at the end, I'm going to explain to you how you could have access to Jenny on more one-to-one level. So thank you, Jenny, for joining us, and go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, I find that this topic is hardly spoken about, and it's probably the most important topic when we're talking about impacts on mental health and social and emotional well-being of children. There's a lot of things that are said that divorce is super hard on children. It impacts them in many variety of ways, but I don't think divorce is hard on children. I think how parents do divorce is hard on children. And there's a specific difference in that. And so when we're going into the high conflict realm, yes, that tends to significantly impact the children more because there's usually more contention, more conflict, more litigation. And, unfortunately, the parents are drawn into that rabbit hole, whether they're both high conflict personalities or one is and the other is not, and just trying to get through. And in the middle are the children. And they seem to be lost in that abyss. And they also realize that they can't really speak up, because if they speak up, one parent might get really upset or the other parent might get really hurt. And so they learn how to, navigate these two different households and eventually learn how to just be quiet or act out or rebel, and all of these things come into play with mental health and social emotional well-being. And kids do it in a variety of different ways. They internalize, they externalize, but they maladapt, meaning they're not adapting well to the situation, and they learn these maladaptive behaviors. So at the end of the day, how do we allow them to have their own part in this piece of the puzzle without taking it personally, making it the other parent's problem, right? Like, how do we allow them to be their own little, being in the center who's saying, I don't like any of this. You and and they're allowed to have that truth, they're allowed to have that emotional expression. And how do we provide space for that without taking it on as it's something we're doing wrong, or trying to fix it, or blaming the other parent? Or sometimes I see this very often, and it sounds counterintuitive, I know how it's going to sound, but more often than not, parents place their children in all these therapies and wonder what's wrong with their child, what's wrong with their child, what's wrong with their child. And what's wrong with their child is they're not being heard, and they're in the middle of a high conflict divorce. And when you put children, and I'm not saying they shouldn't be in therapy, it's not what I'm saying, but when both parties are not going to therapy and they're placing the children into therapy, guess what? The child thinks something's wrong with them.
Yeah.
And they internalize that, and their parents are always fighting, so it must be about them. And then they go to therapy. Do you see that it's like a process? And I don't think we're consciously aware of it because we have good faith effort most often than not. But at the end of the day, the kids that I work with say, my parents fight about me all the time. I'm the problem. If I didn't exist, they wouldn't be fighting. And that's a sad thing to hear. And I do think when parents, and I've been there before a long time ago, but when we are in the litigation process, it is super hard to recognize the other aspects of our lives. It just kind of overwhelms. And so my point here is, yes, it overwhelms, and we have to make a lot of room for our children. And sometimes it's uncomfortable because they're going to say things we don't want to hear, but they should. They're allowed to have all of their feelings, all of their truths. And, a lot of the work that I continue to do is what helps kids is to hear. Sounds simple, but literally hear without being triggered, without wanting to prove to them that they're wrong or that the other parent is the problem. Literally just actively listening and then validating their experience, because most people really want that. And, kids are the ones in the middle. So if they say this sucks, I believe you, this sucks. As opposed to, you know what, your dad is the reason why this sucks.
Oh yeah.
You say and it completely removes the kids' valid, need to express what they feel. My concern is if we don't start practicing this, that kids will learn that they can't talk about any of this, or they shut down.
So what do you do if you can't get both parents into therapy? I mean, you're in a divorce situation. Everybody's got a mind of their own. Everyone thinks, believes their own truths. So what do you do in that case?
I feel I lean into finding the parent that is coachable.
Oh yeah, that would help.
So I kind of lean into that when I'm working with co-parent. I'm like, which one is coachable? And, I offer up suggestions and phrase it as, because it's true, this is going to strengthen your relationship with your child long-term. And do you want that? I mean, does that make sense? Like, if you don't want to go to therapy, got it. But how can we support your kid being a kid, as opposed to you're fighting over this being back and forth? So how do we build your kid's life? Can they have friends? Can they have tennis? How do we normalize their life? Because they're so in the middle that we need to recognize they're still a child that's in 4th grade.
Yeah. And that's something that's really important. And I think that, as, parents, we are just highly emotional, and, we're having already the stress of having to go through all these changes and all these modifications in life. Like, you don't know the difference between this and that anymore. You can't see straight. So I think that speaking to a neutral third person is important. I don't believe that every child needs to go to therapy. I think that it's like sort of like a standard automatic old paradigm, like, oh, all I need in my divorce is a lawyer and a therapist. And this is my golden team, and I don't need anybody else because they've got all my answers for me. Well,
Right.
I can tell you that it's wrong and it's not true. That is not the case. Your therapist cannot necessarily work with a high conflict divorce. They are not trained for it. They can help you in other ways, but this is not their training. So
Yes.
sometimes it's important to speak to a specialist who can help you with this area so that you can know, how do I speak to my kids? What do I do? What do I not do? What's going to affect them in the long term? And then what do I do when I'm trying to help the kids and the other parent is trying to do the exact opposite, and all they're trying to do is cause chaos? So now
Yes.
I'm a monkey in the middle, because this is very normal to be a monkey in the middle. And how do I, stay stable and grounded and be able to support the two sides? You got the wacky side who's causing trouble, and then you have the kids who don't know how to deal with it.
Yeah, they're dysregulated, right? They're living in 2 different realities, and none of this is their fault.
Yeah.
So I'm a big believer in, and a lot of people don't like to hear this, but you're the parent. They didn't ask for their parents to get a divorce.
Yeah.
So, putting our parent cap on, your work is to stay as neutral as possible on your side of the street. That is your job, period, end of story. And that is very, very hard when your kids are coming back and they're dysregulated, for they're probably saying things that they heard from the other parent that that's activating you, and you're triggered, and all of that is valid and all of that makes sense. But your job is to remove that from the equation and show up and be present.
Yeah.
because they do not need you to be dysregulated. They need you to co-regulate with them. That's the whole point. Another thing about high conflict that really bothers me with therapists, and I'm not anti-therapist, I just want to be clear here, but this is a niche. This is a niche market, high conflict. It's not normal. And I mean, it's not a typical experience. So when you involve these specialists, what happens is that they become a part of this triangulation. Then the courts get involved. And, who's advocating for the kid? Because now this specialist is in a position where both parents are trying to get this person on their team. And they're not really able to advocate for the child because now they're the mediator between these two parents. And the kid is like, or what happens, and I don't particularly like, is that the specialist will speak for the child in court, hypothetically, right? And then the child will get punished by the parent. I can't believe you're saying this to your therapist, right? So then the child once again learns, I can't trust any of these people. I don't have a safe outlet. So I tend to say, please don't bring a child therapist into this equation. And people think I'm crazy, but I don't find it helpful. I actually find it harmful. And I don't want the kid involved in this court hearing. And, I want the kid to be in Girl Scouts.
So what you would do is you would work with the parent who is more the coachable one to teach them what to say and how to express it so that the kid doesn't have to represent themselves in the situation.
Yes. And, or both, is how can we provide the support for your child without it being a therapist? So, for example, can we bring in other healthy adults in your child's life that model healthy relationships, a coach, a tutor, a teacher? Can we do that so they're learning to trust another adult that's there for them, and they're also learning that there can be healthy dynamics with other adults in their lives. So therapy isn't always the way to go, and it's not really the overall goal here. The overall goal here is to build the resources and the support for the child. That's what on your side of the street. So I kind of tend to manipulate that side. I try and find people that can't be triangulated or used in court because to me, those are the ones that actually really matter for the child. I don't know if that makes sense, but like a troop leader or a guidance counselor at school, which is pretty neutral, they don't get involved in court. How do we find someone that is really there for the kid?
Who is non-litigious, whose purpose is not to go and escalate the issues. I mean, I wouldn't think a therapist would, but
Right.
the fact that they get involved in the court system already it's sort of like it forces them into the melange of craziness.
Yes.
Where you're trying to keep the neutrality. So what you're saying is that you would coach the parent to start to find different resources that, like, all the missing links of what the kids need, find the people. That's very smart. I like that. I like that idea. Well, there's a lot of different theories and strategies that Jenny can share with you. I'm sure I'm enlightened already, and it's only been a couple of minutes. But in order to have a strategic one-to-one session with Jenny, please make sure that you check out her links here. You'll have access to all her coordinates. Please feel free to reach out to her, have a conversation with her, and see if and how she can help you. So thank you, Jenny. That was very enlightening. Thank you for sharing that with us. And until the next time we speak, I wish you all a day that matters. Take care.